One, I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 29 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. I will start by acknowledging that I am meeting on Treaty 1 territory and the homeland of the Métis people. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Pursuant to Study Order 108, Bracket 2, and the motions adopted by the committee on Thursday, March 3rd, 2022, the committee is resuming its study of the assessment of Canada's security posture in relation to Russia. Appearing, the Honorable Marco Mendicino, PC MP, Minister of Public Safety, and he will be supported by representatives from Canada Border Services Agency, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, the Department of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Welcome to all. I now invite Minister Mendicino to make an opening statement, sir.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, colleagues. And just as we begin, I will endeavor to introduce quickly those colleagues who are here also to provide this committee with information and testimony as the case may be required. Starting from my right, we have from the RCMP, Denis Baudin, Michael Duhem, my Deputy Minister, Rob Stewart, President of the CBSA, John Ozowski, and of course, Michelle Tessier from the service. Members of the committee, it's my pleasure to join you today as you undertake your study assessing Canada's security posture in relationship to Russia. I'd like to begin with an acknowledgement of the shock I know we are all feeling about what is happening in Ukraine. No words can truly describe the horrors of war and devastation across the country and desperation of those who are still alive and those who are struggling in the face of brutal attacks. On May 4th, I had the pleasure of meeting Ambassador-designate of Ukraine to Canada, Ms. Yulia Kovaliv, to hear her concerns and to explore how Canada can further support her country. We also spoke about the need to counter Russian disinformation and foreign interference. Russia's illegal invasion into Ukraine will have deep and long-term geopolitical consequences, and it directly threatens the rules-based international order. The situation has reinforced the fact that the international community is strongest when it acts together in defense of our shared values. It has also underlined that we are not immune from threats to our own security posture here in Canada. Hostile activities by foreign state actors like Russia pose a significant risk to Canada's national security. Malicious cyber activity, including cyber attacks, among others, threats to our critical infrastructure, like our borders, bridges, and power stations, the spread of mis- and disinformation, espionage, and foreign interference. Le Canada prend toutes ces menaces très au sérieux.
Canada takes these threats seriously, and public safety is well equipped to deal with these in time of peace or war, even if the volume and complexity of threats has increased over the past few years. Within the public safety portfolio, the RCMP, Public Safety Canada, and all other organizations have played an important role. CSIS is investigating when government requires it to take measures in order to reduce threats to security in Canada. The RCMP is also an important stakeholder in Canada's efforts to counter hostile threats. They investigate criminal actions linked to foreign interference as well as cybercriminality and allegations of war crimes.
Works around the clock to ensure our borders are safe from a variety of threats. It also supports the government's commitment to provide eligible Ukrainian nationals with access to an expedited immigration process. The CBSA will also play a key role in enforcing the legislation I announced last week to ban sanctioned Russians from entering Canada. They shall have no safe haven here. The CBSA works closely with CSIS and other partners to conduct security screenings and to mobilize liaison officers overseas to support where needed. And both the CBSA and RCMP play an important role in the sanctions framework to ensure we hold those complicit in Russia's invasion to account. As members know, Canada has already introduced sanctions against 700 individuals and entities this year and adopted measures targeting specific goods and sectors, all in close coordination with the international community. Mr. Chair, I want to touch briefly on how we're equipped to respond to some specific threats, namely those to our cybersecurity and critical infrastructure. Malicious cyber activities that target the systems underpinning our critical infrastructure are a constant concern. They impact businesses, individuals, our economy, and all levels of government. We've known for a long time that Russia has significant cyber capabilities and a demonstrated history of using them recklessly and irresponsibly. Public Safety Canada works with other government departments and agencies as well as international allies to attribute malicious cyber activity to state or state-sponsored actors when it can, with confidence, link the malicious activity to a particular actor. In Canada, we're fortunate to have a national cybersecurity strategy to protect Canadians, and that has already led to the establishment of the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, a single authoritative source for expert technical advice and support for Canada and Canadians. The Centre provides public advisories, including on the Russian threat, and shares valuable cyber threat information with Canadian critical infrastructure owners and operators. The cyber strategy has also led to the creation of the National Cyber Coordination Unit within the RCMP. That unit coordinates police operations against cyber criminals, including internationally, and works closely with law enforcement partners to address borderless cybercrime threats. And in light of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the government has enhanced engagements with critical infrastructure sectors. In fact, just a few weeks ago, we held a multi-sector network meeting with critical infrastructure stakeholders to discuss threats and mitigation measures for Canadian industry. Mr. Chair, all of these efforts are bolstered by Budget 2022, funding of nearly $700 million over 5 years to support how we fight cybercrime and defend critical government and private sector systems and increase our collective resilience. We remain steadfastly committed to combating foreign interference by any foreign state seeking to harm Canada. We will continue to condemn Russia's invasion. We will continue to support the people of Ukraine, and we will continue to partner with allies around the world who share our commitment to peace, democracy, and the rules-based international order. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much, Minister. I appreciate your attention to the clock, as always. Now we move into our first round of questions. And the first 6-minute block goes to Ms. Dancho. Whenever you are ready, Ms. Dancho.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the Minister for being here today and for all of those who came with you as well. Thank you for working so hard to keep us safe. Minister, you went over a lot about cybersecurity. I'm going to get to that, but I first want to ask you a little bit about the Prime Minister visiting the NORAD Command Center in Colorado. Of course, you are the Minister of Public Defense or Public Safety, so that's border security, as you mentioned, CSIS and the like. But of course, I think you would acknowledge that given the threat of Russian aggression, your department, in essence, overlaps a bit with Minister Annon's Ministry of Defense. I'm sure you've had discussions of how to keep Canada safe should the worst happen, a cyber attack or something much more scary like a missile attack. And I just wanted to ask you about that because it's the first time that the Prime Minister of Canada has actually visited that command center in decades. I think that sends a clear signal of how seriously your government may be taking NORAD upgrades. Is that correct?
I think that's a very fair assessment, Ms. Dancho, and I also would echo the concerns within the premise of your question around the current state of geopolitical affairs. I want to thank you and the other members of this committee for studying Russia's illegal invasion into Ukraine, and I think looking at some of the post-World War II multilateral international platforms, including NORAD, including NATO, is extremely important as we not only help to support the people of Ukraine in defending their own state sovereignty, but to stand up for democracies around the world. And the Prime Minister's trip to NORAD, which, as you pointed out, is one in some considerable time, is a reflection of that commitment.
Mm-hmm. And we're seeing other countries around the world take their defense spending and their national security very seriously in light of the invasion. We've seen Germany announce that it's going to meet its 2% commitment with $140 billion in military spending. Sweden and Finland are joining NATO, so people are moving forward. Do you think that Canada should spend the $15 billion to upgrade our NORAD defenses?
Ms. Dancho, I think our government is very much seized with the need to ensure that the Canadian Armed Forces and the Department of National Defence, including the community of agencies which are here within the public safety and national security apparatus, are properly resourced to defend Canadian interests both here and abroad.
Do you feel that they are properly resourced right now?
We make a very strong case in Budget 2022 to ensure that they continue to have the tools they need. So the $700 million, for example, that will go to defend our cyber critical infrastructure, as I pointed out in my remarks, is among the many other investments that we're making. There's additional resources for both the RCMP and the CBSA, as well as my department, which touch directly on the subject that you're studying.
And I think that those are important investments in cybersecurity. I'm going to get to that. But of course, as I'm sure you heard just the other day, the U.S. Ambassador David Cohen criticized your government's recent budget for failing to make the necessary investments in military spending and defense. Can you comment on whether we should be spending more, and do you agree we should meet the 2% target?
Well, first, I've had the opportunity to engage with Ambassador Cohen, and I think his posting is the latest in a long line of ambassadors to Canada that reflects the very strong relationship that exists between our two countries. I think that as we continue to ensure that we're giving our members of CAF as well as our national security agencies the resources that we need to, that we're very transparent about what those resources will be put to good use with. So supporting NORAD, supporting the work that we're doing to ensure that we're protecting our critical infrastructure, including cybersecurity, is imperative, and we're putting investments in the budget to do that.
He has been quite critical of your government's investments or lack thereof of what he thinks is acceptable to ensure our relationship and our defense relationship with North America is strong. We've also heard from witnesses that although Canada is a strong contributor to intelligence with the Five Eyes, that we could be doing more. In essence, it was explained to me that you get out what you put in, and that we're not putting in nearly enough, which is why we weren't invited to join AUKUS, for example, as I'm sure you're aware. So can you comment of the conversations you've had with CSIS? Have you contributed more to their budget? Do you think that more should be done so that we can be bigger players at the table when it comes to contributing intelligence to the Five Eyes and the like?
Well, let me say two things very quickly, because I think there were two parts to your question. First, with regards to our cooperation with the United States as well as other allies, we have exceptionally strong relationships with the United States, particularly in intelligence. And I think that is critical, whether it's in the Five Eyes forums or in other forums, that we maintain that, particularly in light of the evolving threats to our national security. And again, commending the members of this committee for studying the particular threats that are posed by Russia as a result of their invasion into Ukraine.
Can you explain, the AUKUS agreement with Australia, the UK, and the US is a collaboration on military procurement, intelligence sharing. Of course, you're in charge of CSIS, or you're the elected official in charge of CSIS. Can you explain why we were left out of that agreement? I mean, you've said you're quite confident in our contribution, yet we were left out of that agreement by the US.
Well, look, without wanting to, comment on behalf of other countries and the multi or bilateral relationships which they may choose to enter into, I would just again reiterate that we have exceptionally strong relationships, not only with the United States, but for example, I had the chance to meet very recently with some of our Australian counterparts who visited to this country to talk about the robust collaboration that exists when it comes to intelligence. So we also have, in addition to the Five Eyes Forum, very strong bilateral relationships with other countries and like-minded democracies to ensure that we are meeting the new threats that emerge.
Just with my last question, I'm sorry. We've been hearing from cybersecurity experts that we need to invest more money in protecting our small, medium-sized enterprises with cybersecurity. Does any of the new money you announced for cybersecurity help SMEs?
I'm sorry.
Just my last
I'm sorry, Ms.
question.
Dancil,
Can you just answer?
10 seconds, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, a lot there, but very briefly, yes, some of the investments in Budget 2022 will obviously accrue to the benefit of the work within the agencies that are represented here, including CSIS and CBSA. Cybersecurity is a sector that touches on a lot of the different portfolios that are represented at this table.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd now like to turn to Mr. Chang, who has a 6-minute slot. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning to the witnesses. Good morning, Minister. Thank you for joining us today. Good to see you again. Minister, you outlined the threat posed by Russia or by Russian disinformation to exploit and amplify divisions that already exist in Canada. In Budget 2022, the government proposes to spend $10 million over 5 years to coordinate, develop, and implement government-wide measures designed to combat disinformation and protect our democracy.
It does, and if I could just be permitted to expand, I think I'm quite confident that the members of this committee and all parliamentarians are seized with the significant risks and threats that are posed by Russia, their illegal invasion into Ukraine, or their latest invasion into Ukraine, is a reflection of the destabilizing campaign that they are embarked upon. And it hasn't only had a brutal and profoundly negative impact on the people of Ukraine, it has the potential to be destabilizing elsewhere, including here in Canada. For instance, Russia's effort to proliferate a narrative that they went into Ukraine to denazify that country, or that it was in retaliation as a result of Ukrainian aggression, is flat out false. And the proliferation of those narratives online does make its way into the Canadian market, and so we have to be very much alive to that. So the budget 2022 does set out investments, which again will help to address concerns around disinformation, around misinformation, and the agencies that are represented in this table are very much seized with that work.
Thank you, Minister. What has our government done to counter this disinformation?
Well, a number of things, and I touched on it within my remarks. But first, I'll say from the sort of mile-high level, we have a national cybersecurity strategy. We have a national cyber action plan, and many of the officials that are on this table are seized with that work. So, for example, the RCMP would be able to investigate and potentially prosecute any foreign interference which spills over into something which could be charged under the criminal code. The work that CSIS does is able to detect potential threats to our national security in the form of foreign interference, in the form of disinformation, in the form of malinformation. The work that CBSA does is about ensuring that as we are accommodating those Ukrainians who have had to flee from their homes because they've been destroyed, that we are doing it with integrity and with security. And those are just some of that is the policy architecture within which we are coordinating our efforts across government to address the threats that are posed as a result of Russia's illegal incursion into Ukraine.
Thank you, Minister. I will defer the remainder of my time to MP Noor Mohammed.
Thank you, Mr. Chang. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses and to the Minister for your being here with us today. And I'd like to introduce a motion, if I might, in this time. And I do this, and I want to preface this by saying the following. This committee has worked extremely well in finding ways to collaborate. And so I want to make sure that when I bring this motion forward, I'm going to be seeking unanimous consent to move the motion. It is in relation to the fact that we have seen a substantial run on the purchase of firearms. This motion is not intended to usurp or replace any of the important debate we need to have on Bill C-21, but I do wish to introduce the following motion, and we'll seek unanimous consent from the committee to move it. And the motion reads as follows: that the committee report the following to the House, that pursuant to Section 118 4B2 of the Firearms Act 1998, the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security has decided not to conduct inquiries or public hearings into the proposed regulations tabled and referred to the committee on May 30th, 2022. Translation and the motion itself have been circulated to the clerk. So I put this before the committee simply because I believe it's important for us to get unanimous consent to move forward, recognizing how well this committee is working. And so it really is in response to the alarming run on the purchase of firearms. I know a number of members of all parties have raised this issue. I've had discussions with members of the opposition as well as others who have expressed their deep and grave concern about this. And so I'd put this forward to the committee and seek everyone's collaboration in getting unanimous consent. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, colleagues, we have a motion that's been brought forward. It would require unanimous consent to proceed. So let me pose the question. Does the honourable member have unanimous consent to proceed with this motion?
No.
No? Okay, then I gather we take the notice of motion as an advance on the next meeting of this committee.
Nope.
That will then
That's okay.
debate the motion. Clerk, is that right? It is. So no unanimous consent, and time had run out on the previous speaker, so I will move to Ms. Michaud, who has a 6-minute block. The floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci tout le monde pour votre.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for all the officials for being here, and thank you, Mr. Minister. I have a question with regards to secret decrees that your government has passed since 2015. We're talking about 72 of them. This is an increase compared to the Stephen Harper government, and to normally justify the adoption of this, we have to cite national or military safety, or to say that this is linked to national security, foreign investments. So
Mr. Chair, I apologize to Madame Michaud, but the bells are going. I wonder if we can get unanimous consent to continue through to the end of the first round before we adjourn for the, or before we break for the vote.
So do we have unanimous consent to continue? We do, so let's do just that. So Madame Michaud, you have the floor.
OK. Merci.
Okay, thank you. So one of these secret cabinet orders was adopted between January 28th and February 1st, 2022, and the second around the mid-February mark, and this corresponds to the beginning of the trucker convoy protest. And another secret cabinet order was passed when there was concern in the international community, beginning with regards to what was happening in Russia, preparing to invade Ukraine around February 24th. There were other secret cabinet orders that were passed when Russia was invading Ukraine. And in response, your government says that they're being transparent. Well, I'm wondering, if you want to be transparent with the population, why are you proceeding with a secret order in council, especially since there were many more than with previous governments? Can we believe that there are true threats to public safety in Canada, and what you're trying to do is to hide this information or keep it confidential? Could you speak to why so many secret orders in council? 72. Thank you, Mrs. Michaud, and thank you for your question. This gives me an opportunity to reaffirm that, yes, it's very important for us to protect this value of an open and transparent government. These principles apply to all our files. At the same time, as you mentioned in your question, there are other principles that we have to follow in order to protect public safety and national security. These decisions were made to protect not only the principles, but also all Canadians. So can we understand that some information is kept secret because Canada is afraid of repercussions with regards to what's happening in Ukraine, with Russia that has disinformation campaigns, cyber attacks? Can we understand that this is why the government has chosen all these secret orders in council? Well, there are different factors that are considered by the government when we decide to apply the principles for public security on decisions that are made. We always try to share the maximum amount of information as possible with the public on our decision with regards to orders in council in order to respect the value of open government. Thank you, Mr. Minister. At the end of May, 4 former national security advisors and 2 former CSIS directors, ambassadors, retired deputy ministers and university professors contributed in a study at University of Ottawa saying that Canada was not ready to counter any Russian attack. And they were saying that we were not prepared to deal with this new world, and we had to rethink our national security. One of the observations was that the Russian invasion of Ukraine shows direct threats to Canada, China that could represent a challenge over the longer term, according to these experts. How do you respond to these criticism of former government and security experts? They say that our national security is not up to snuff. Well, I know some of the authors of this study, and I would like to thank them for their work and for their contribution. I had the opportunity to look over many of their recommendations. I believe that there's some merit in delving further into these and to try to find solutions that the government might be able to integrate to its strategy. This study was done at an opportune time. On the government side, we are modernizing our strategy within the context of cybersecurity. So this is very positive. It's very good that this study was conducted. At the same time, there's a lot of excellent work that's being done.
Thank you, Minister. I would now like to invite Mr. McGregor, who will have a 6-minute block of questioning. Over to you, sir, whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Welcome again, Minister. It's good to see you back. So we have heard from a number of witnesses across the spectrum, many different experts. We've been very lucky to have their testimony before this committee about the threat posed by cyber crime in the Canadian context. And I know with respect to what's going on in Canada, we have the Cybercrime Coordination Centre with the RCMP. We have our Communications Security Establishment, which runs the Centre for Cybersecurity. Minister, as you well know, when you're dealing with the federal government, it is a massive organization, and sometimes we can fall into siloed thinking. CSE reports to the Minister of Defense. The RCMP's unit reports to Public Safety. I guess what I want to know as a committee member is how are your two ministries ensuring that there's harmonization in the work that's being done between those two agencies, that there's not duplication of work. Sometimes things can get missed when you've got two different ministries involved. So can you just give us an update on how those ministries and their respective agencies are working together on this very real problem?
It's a great question, Mr. McGregor. And to begin, I would emphasize that the National Cybersecurity Strategy as well as the National Cybersecurity Action Plan are two policy instruments which we use to coordinate these efforts. And among other things, my Deputy Minister, Rob Stewart, is playing a chairing role that brings together different officials across the government, including at DND. And that forum, among others, is a way in which we share information, coordinate efforts, identify threats, determine how best to introduce mitigating strategies. And I think you're quite right. It's important that these efforts continue to avoid the kind of stovepiping which can lead to a fracturing of a coordinated response.
Thank you for that. We know that the Russian government has close allyship and coordination with several criminal organizations. They have partnered with these criminal organizations to do their dirty work, and often that has very real consequences around the world, but here in Canada. We have heard from witnesses that while the federal government and businesses that are under federal jurisdiction, they may have some pretty top-level security, like our national banks and so on. The concern is when it comes to subnational organizations and governments. So our provincial healthcare systems, the cybersecurity of our big cities, even major businesses. I guess what I want to know is, number one, how are you tackling that problem? And number two, we have had some witnesses call for mandatory incident reporting. Sometimes businesses are loath to report that they have been held hostage by ransomware. They find it's just easier to pay off the person, not report it. And also there can be a threat for further damages if they do in fact report to the authorities. So what steps are you taking with regards to those two questions?
Again, I cannot emphasize enough how important it is that in the current geopolitical environment within which we find ourselves, that we are very much on high alert for potential attacks from hostile state actors like Russia, which could manifest through cyber attacks, through ransomware, which look to identify potentially valuable targets to Canadian interests, like critical infrastructure, but equally to subnational targets, different orders of government, and other sectors of the economy. And a lot of this work is being led by the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, which falls under the purview of the CSE, where we work with the industry, where we work with leaders within the economy to provide them with practical common sense advice on how they can best protect their businesses.
Incident reporting, I mean, there's the old adage, we don't know what we don't know, and we know, like from other studies, Statistics Canada has gaps in our knowledge of violent crimes that might be committed with firearms. There's definitely some room for improvement there. If we don't really know the full scope of the problem, if some businesses are keeping this in-house, like what steps is your government taking to maybe bring in a mandatory reporting requirement when they've been hit by cybercrime?
I was just, I appreciate the follow-up, and I was just coming to that as I was talking about how we partner with leaders within the economy and industry to encourage reporting, to encourage it in a way where they're not concerned about either stereotypes or stigmas.
Encourage is different from mandatory.
That is a true distinction that you're making, and certainly it's something that we are reflecting on within government. But I would also point out that the CCCS, the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, also publishes a national cyber threat assessment, which is another tool which can be used by industry leaders within the economy and other orders of government. And through that particular agency within government, we do try to offer support.
Is mandatory incident reporting on the table?
I absolutely think it's something that we need to be considering, for sure. Yeah, it's an option that we're considering very carefully.
Okay. Mr. Chair, I'll donate my last 10 seconds to you.
Thank you. We now move to the second round of questioning, and the first to lead us off is Mr. Lloyd with a 5-minute slot. Clerk, I gather you're keeping your eye on the
Mr.
vote?
Chair, point of order.
Yes, Mr. McKinnon. Yes.
So we had unanimous consent to finish to the end of the first round.
Yep.
And so that we can go and suspend and go to the vote.
Yeah, well, if that's the will of the committee, we can do that now and then resume after everyone has had a chance to vote. Are members voting remotely, or are they heading into the West Block?
Both, Chair.
I can't see the answer. Both. Okay, then I think the prudent thing to do is to suspend until members have had a chance to vote, and we'll resume as soon as members have resumed their seat. So the meeting is now suspended.